Welcome back to Timetables of the Lost.
Timetables of the Lost. Season 1, Chapter 3. The Painted Market. The platform opened into a city that behaved like a canvas deciding what to be in front of you. Color wasn't decoration here. It had jurisdiction. Awnings unfurled in drafts of saffron, ultramarine, and a green that remembered forests better than forests remember themselves. Smoke rose in brushstrokes. Even the shadows had pigment, wine-dark under stalls, chalky where the sun had been edited out. A brass arch announced the rules in a hand too elegant to be kind. Declare what you mean. Bargain only in tints you can name. Counterfeit feelings are forfeited. Tolls enforced. Keep your meanings narrow, the guide said, falling into step. Wide meanings get priced like waterfront property. What do I buy? Morgan asked because the market had the gravity of need. Everything here looked like it could solve something if you just chose correctly. Tools, the guide said, not answers. They entered with the traffic of the newly astonished. A calligrapher painted words on air that hung there, drying to paragraphs you could fold into your pocket. A perfumer bottled summer rain in tiny ampoules, then apologized that this batch had fewer afternoons in it. A woman sold doors that could be rolled up like rugs and emailed to addresses that did not exist yet. Looking for anything in particular? Asked a merchant with a voice of silk across grit. Their stall was a riot of jars labeled in brush script. Quiet blue, second thought sepia, vow white, cafe light unsweetened. They wore gloves the color of bruised plums and a smile that didn't travel to their eyes. I need. Morgan started, then stopped. Declare what you mean, not what you want. I mean to carry a room's quiet to someone's body without sound. A hush, the merchant said, pleased. You want a hush? I mean a hush, she corrected. The merchant tipped their head. Price, a small, specific joy. Laughter from one moment you won't use again. Morgan felt the ask with the exactness of a needle. The air around her rippled with candidates, laughing until she cried on the kitchen floor with her sister over an unfixable pie. The time a dog decided she was furniture, and she decided to allow it. A joke told badly that landed anyway. The market listened to her choosing. That was the worst part, the sense of being attended to by a place with good penmanship. Too dear, the guide said mildly, eyes on a rack of dried pigments, as if discussing the price of nails. The merchant's smile edged. First time courtesy, then. Half a laugh. Just the breath before the sound. Morgan lifted the jar of quiet blue. Inside, a heavy, soft light bobbed like a lantern underwater. It made her throat loosen just looking at it. She thought of her brass leaf, the lullaby receipt, warming itself in her pocket as if it had hurt its future. What else counts? She asked. Other currencies? The merchants spread their hands. Maps of hesitation. The comfortable lie you tell yourself about mornings. We also accept complete, original definitions. Definitions? Morgan said. Of things that matter, the merchant said, delighted. We're very short on those. Most people bring us slogans. Morgan closed her eyes. Define a hush, not silence. Silence can be a wound. A hush is permission, a room deciding to hold you while you put your pieces down. The definition assembled itself like scaffolding in her blood. A hush is a room that takes your weight without keeping it, she said, voice barely above the market's breathing. It doesn't erase sound. It edits it toward mercy. The merchant went still, like a book deciding whether to open. The guide's head turned a centimeter. Somewhere, A colorist hissed at an apprentice to listen. Original, the merchant said at last, and their voice had lost its lacquer. Accepted. That plus a memory you don't need. Which kind? Something you learned just to be polite. Morgan considered the muscle memory of small compliances. In 5th grade, she'd memorized the names of state capitals because everyone did, not because she cared. She could surrender Pierre without denting the shape of herself. That felt like cheating, and the market would notice. There was the trick she had learned at 22, how to nod as if a man had said something useful even when he had simply said it loudly. She could give that up. She shouldn't ever use it again. That one, she said, and the merchant wrote it on a slip. Polite nod, male explanation, age 22, present. Stamped, they said. They held out the jar. Morgan felt the hush move through her wrists up into her shoulders like a careful, confident hand. The price bit at the back of her neck then eased, as if a habit had been unhooked. She didn't realize she'd been holding her breath until she wasn't. Next, the guide said, the word rearranged into a question. Something for rain, Morgan said, surprising herself. Not the weather. The kind that happens inside people when the air changes. Melancholy management, the merchant said crisply. For that you need contrast, not cure. They slid out a tin labeled Sunstitch, temporary. Price, 1 unfinished apology. Morgan started to say no, then heard her mouth preparing a familiar sentence. I'm sorry for the way I left that conversation with my mother. She stopped. The market would take the promise with the apology, and the promise was useful. Too vague, she said. I can't spend the apology that changes the outcome. I could sell you an apology I would only make to feel like a better person. Fair, the merchant said, amused. I'll bundle, throw in a swatch of borrowed bravery, single use, if you add a comfortable lie as tip. Morgan's mind served up I don't need anyone, wrapped in tasteful minimalism. She set it on the counter, felt it leave, and tried not to watch what took its place. The merchant packed the tin and the swatch into a paper bag printed with a color wheel. Tell me if the hush settles unevenly, they said. Sometimes walls remember more than they should. As they threaded deeper into the market, Morgan's pocket grew heavier with small, necessary weight. Not answers. Tools. She bought a thumb-sized Obadash that, when crushed, could make a room feel like dawn for exactly one breath. She acquired a pencil that wrote in regret graphite, erasable but leaving behind a sheen that would admit a mistake had once lived there. Everywhere, prices tried to climb her. Everywhere she practiced saying no in ways that did not feed the market more than she meant. They passed a stall where a woman sold voices in coils, each voice labeled with its native habitat. Kitchen table, bridge at night, hospital hallway, back seat of a car you shouldn't be in. Morgan's fingers hovered. The voices vibrated in their jars like small, attentive snakes. Careful, the guide said. Borrowed voices are worse than borrowed truths. A bell sounded, not bronze or brass, but enamel, bright and brittle. The crowd shifted. The air cooled. People around them stood a little taller, as if bracing. What is it? Morgan asked. Continuity audit, the guide said. The market hates counterfeits even more than brass does. A procession approached. 3 auditors in coats painted the matte gray of a sky that couldn't commit to rain. They carried ledgers and small mirrors instead of weapons. The crowd parted without being asked. An apprentice colorist beside Morgan squeezed her jar of elation yellow until the glass made a tiny bird sound. The lead auditor stopped a few feet from Morgan, not looking at her, looking beside her, behind her, through her. They lifted their mirror. Its surface stayed dull, as mirrors do when they've decided the truth is a private matter. Two accounts with overlapping claims, the auditor said to the air. Declare your trueness. Morgan didn't turn. Her scalp prickled, as if someone were trying to make a part with cold hands. Declare, the auditor repeated. The air behind her tried on her voice and almost got it right. Morgan Thomas, the other said, and it would have fooled any human ear. The mirror did not brighten. The auditor's mouth thinned. Morgan could feel the pull toward over-explanation, the urge to spill biography like a receipt roll. Declare what you mean. She kept her words narrow. I am the one who traded a polite nod, she said. The mirror warmed a shade. I am the one who defined a hush. The mirror brightened, then considered. And I am the one who won't buy a voice, she finished. The mirror flashed once, tidy as a stamp. The auditors wrote without turning pages. The air behind her held very, very still, then smoothed itself back into the market's temperature, like a hand withdrawing from a pocket it had no right to be in. Continuity preserved, the lead auditor said, half to the ledger, half to the market. Claim denied pending additional proof. They moved on, mirrors rebuffing the faces that tried to hide in them. Morgan let out a breath she'd mislaid. The guide's mouth made a line that could have become a smile if paid for. You kept the door small, they said. Good. Will it keep her out? It keeps you in, the guide said, which is the same thing until it isn't. They turned a corner into a narrower street where stalls pressed shoulder to shoulder and the air tasted of cloves and fresh paper. A sign swung over a booth with painted hands on it, each fingertip dipped in a different color. Retouches and repairs, it read. The woman behind the counter had palms stained every hue of insistence. Touch-ups? She called. Scuffs on your name? We smooth. We seal. We can brighten the parts you've let weather. Morgan must have looked too long. The woman's gaze caught hers like a seam ripper catches thread. You sweet, the retoucher said. You're bleeding around the edges. People will read you wrong if you don't set it. What's the price? Morgan asked, before the guide could steer them away. The woman's smile was all competence. Nothing permanent. Just a glaze to keep you from losing too much in transit. Price is easy. Give me one wrinkle that doesn't hurt yet, and I'll keep it from becoming a scar. Morgan thought of the notch the clip had left in her ticket. She thought of the mark losing laughter would make if she handed over the wrong thing. She thought of the lullaby leaf warming against her thigh. She shook her head. I mean to keep my edges readable, not sealed. Language. The retoucher sang, not offended. Saved you 10 years of repairs with that one sentence. Go on then. You've got enough in your pocket to make something. What? Morgan asked, suddenly tired. A room, the retoucher said. You've been buying pieces of one all day. It clicked. The hush, the dawn ash, the sunstitch, the single-use bravery. Tools, not answers. She could make a room where singing wasn't needed because the room itself remembered how to rest. Last call, the market cried, vendors in chorus, tarps shivering as if they'd heard a weather report only tarps receive. Somewhere, the auditors snapped their mirrors shut. Somewhere, a perfumer corked dusk. They hurried back toward the platform. The market, obliging to a point, rearranged itself to let them pass. They'd almost reached the arch when a stallkeeper in a coat painted with constellations stepped into Morgan's path, hat in hand. "Package for Thomas," they said cheerfully, signed one stop behind. They held out a small parcel, wrapped in paper the color of old light. Morgan did not touch it. "Return to sender." Sender declined return. The stallkeeper said, still bright, "Marked inevitable." The guide was suddenly at Morgan's shoulder with more presence than shadow. "Meaning," they said, "not fate. The market sells grammar in dramatic boxes." Morgan looked at the paper. It was stitched with thread so dark it made the light around it behave. Printed on the side, in letters that wanted to be read before anyone could name them, Morgan Thomas, Ticket Transfer Authorization KIT. "Decline," Morgan said. "Not my meaning." "Needs a counter meaning," the stallkeeper said, "or the market will hold it in escrow." Morgan heard herself say, evenly, I keep walking until I decide to stop." The thread went slack. The stallkeeper checked a little gauge pinned to their lapel and sighed. "Counter meaning accepted." They tucked the parcel back under the counter and bowed a fraction. "You're fun. Come back when you require melodrama." They made the train as the doors cleared their throats. Morgan stepped into the vestibule and only then let herself shake. The guide stood with hands in their pockets, looking at nothing as if it were a job. "You nearly lost laughter," they said, not accusing. "I kept half a breath," Morgan said. The jar of quiet blue glowed dimly in her bag, patient. "I paid with something I shouldn't have had in the first place." "Then you're ahead," the guide said. "For now." The intercom announced departure. The market backed away in strokes and smudges, its laws collapsing into pigment the way stages collapse into flats. As the train caught the rails, Morgan felt the brass leaf press warm and certain against her thigh, and in that warmth the possibility, not the old lullaby, but a room she could build and carry. She leaned her head against the cool window. Down the platform, just at the edge of light, the other Morgan watched without moving, a package-shaped emptiness at her feet. "Next stop?" Morgan asked, her voice rough but steadier. The guide glanced at the timetable etched into the carriage wall. "Echoes of home," they said. Outside, the colors thinned. Inside, the hush in the jar pulsed, once like a promise. The market let go of the train like a wet brush lifted from paper. Pigments thinned across the windows, freed into the air as a faint breath of saffron and turpentine. Lamps inside the carriage settled into their ordinary amber, but the light carried a tint now, as if it remembered having been a color more complicated than yellow. Morgan opened her bag. The little jar of quiet blue pulsed gently in its glass, as if checking her pulse in return. The tin of sunstitch clinked against the Obad ash. The borrowed bravery, single use, sat folded like a ticket for a performance she wasn't sure she deserved to see. "Market residue," the guide said, dusting their sleeves. "Color bleed will try to make you generous with meanings. Be stingy." "How do I tell the difference between generosity and a leak?" Morgan asked. "Generosity leaves you able to name yourself afterward," the guide said. "Leaks leave you outlined in someone else's hand." The conductor came down the aisle with the same ceremonial calm as ever. No punches now. They carried the small slate. A new line had written itself beneath the previous notices. Brass receipt, value accruing, 0.17. Morgan felt the brass leaf at her thigh glow like a coin briefly warmed by a palm. She hadn't sung. She had only defined a hush and bought its tools, And yet something in the ledgers believed those were first steps toward making a room that could do what the song once did. Across the aisle, a boy, 9, maybe, struggled with a parcel of market paper. He had the cautious angles of a child who doesn't want to startle anyone, not even his own belongings. When the train eased, the parcel slid. He grabbed, and the paper flexed open enough for Morgan to glimpse a coil of glass thread glowing faintly orange. Listen line, kitchen table. A voice in a jar. The boy shot her a guilty look as round as a coin. "It's mine," he said, and made it sound like I'm not stealing happiness. I only borrowed a spoon. "I didn't say anything," Morgan said. The carriage sighed through a mild bend. A few drops fell from the seam in the ceiling. 1, 2, a poised third, condensation of other people's certainty, gleaming like honesty that had been distilled too long. The drop trembled toward falling above the boy's open parcel. Morgan moved before she thought, pin in her mouth like a lever. "Don't let it get wet." The drop broke on the back of her hand instead. Cool, then hot, then nothing. The boy flinched and hugged the parcel to his chest. "Thank you," he whispered into the paper. "It goes out if it gets wet." The man said. "What will you do with it?" Morgan asked, keeping her voice small enough that the market couldn't reach back through the wrapping and invoice her for interest. He bit his lip. "My mom, she hears me better at the table. Not in the hall. Not in the car." So the man said this would make every room like the table. "It won't," the guide said gently before the boy's hope could inflate to the size of harm. "It will remind you to sit." The boy considered this with the wary practicality of a person who has already met disappointment and decided to keep going anyway. "Okay," he said. "Sitting is cheaper." He fidgeted. A wet brightness clung to his eyelashes that might have been market pigment or a nearly cry. Morgan glanced at her bag. If she cracked the jar of quiet blue here, the hush would go everywhere. The carriage would have to hold all of it, not just the boy. People would pay her with feelings she didn't want because that is what people do when given a room that forgives them. Tools, not answers. Keep meanings narrow. She twisted the jar's lid a fraction. The quiet blue rose inside like sleep remembering its job. She held the jar near the boy's parcel and breathed once, slow. The hush slid out as a measured ribbon and coiled around the paper, steadying his hands. He exhaled. The coil faded. The jar's light dimmed to patient. "Trade?" he whispered, desperate to be correct. "Keep your laughter," Morgan said. "Pay with sitting." He nodded like a ledger being closed. The conductor, who pretended not to have been watching anything, watched anyway. They tilted the slate again. The number beside value accruing crept to 0.23. The math of this world was too literal to be metaphor and too tender to be only math. The carriage drew a long breath. Somewhere behind them, in the vestibule window where reflections gather like gossip, a shade of Morgan's profile stood at an angle that was almost her, head turned, shoulders carrying a twin of the same news. The reflection held a parcel silhouette darker than the dark around it. "Don't look," the guide murmured, the habit now a shared muscle. "You have one bravery. Save it for a verb, not a glance." Morgan closed her hand around the little packet that held borrowed bravery, feeling the paper go warm, then cool, then simply there. A verb. She tried to picture which one.
Stay.
Stop.
No. Mine.
The verbs of a person who had learned to define a hush. Overhead, the lamps wavered and then steadied into a dawn color that made the carriage prettier than honesty. She realized the Obad ash had cracked very slightly in its tin, perfuming the air with a fragile, temporary relief. People loosened shoulders, jaws, the small defenses humans deploy in public, mistaking the shift for a solution. The guide raised one eyebrow. I know, Morgan said, tightening the lid. Contrast, not cure. Look at you, the guide said, traveling without buying a new self at every stall. A balancing clerk pushed their cart, the brass tokens ringing soft like tame coin rain. They handed Morgan a stamped scrap, without stopping. ACT of Mercy, minor credit 0.03, applied to lullaby. The brass leaf warmed again, a quick, grateful animal. Morgan found herself smiling with more teeth than she usually risked in public. It wasn't much. It was also not nothing. The intercom cleared its throat in that sand-smoothed way. Next services. Echoes of home. Prepare declarations. No substitutions honored. The cabin's mood shifted. You could feel it, the dreaded sweetness of a place that let people see the shape of their lives as they might have been. Passengers checked pockets, hair, expectations. One woman smoothed a wedding band she did not wear. A man rehearsed a sentence under his breath, every time choosing a different word to break on. Echoes can be cruel, the guide said. They don't want you back. They want to be worshipped. How do I keep from praying? Morgan asked. Don't kneel, the guide said, and keep your pin where your tongue can reach it. Morgan looked down at the jar, the tin, the folded bravery. The room she could build lived in pieces. She could feel the shape of it, a hush with a seam of dawn and one thread of sun through it, stitched with a promise. You can lay your weight down here, and the floor will bear it. She pictured the room around a kitchen table with a cheap vase on it and a plant that refused to die. The boy clutched his parcel and stared at his shoes as if they were a language he wanted to learn. Morgan touched the jar to the paper again, a whisper of hush, just enough to steady his breathing without stealing anyone else's. Credit on the leaf nudged to 0.25, a quarter toward a song, 4 corners of a room. The train slowed, not with the tired gentleness of commuter temper, but with a ceremony that implied someone had put on clean clothes for this stop. Outside the windows, dark gathered into the suggestion of streets she almost knew, angles falling into their old habits, light pooling where her city would have let it. A billboard flickered to life in the distance. The letters didn't form words so much as familiarity. She felt the ache of recognition in a place recognition had no right to live. The conductor reappeared, their face quietly compassionate in the way of a doctor who knows there will be no anesthesia. Declarations at Echoes must be in the present tense, they said to the carriage at large. What you are now, not what you were, not what you wanted. Many passengers fail there. Morgan slid the brass band on her ticket a millimeter tighter and tucked the leaf deeper, so it could warm against bone. She let the words sit in her mouth, testing their edges. I am the one who, not biography,
Keeps the ticket dry.
not poetry, builds a room instead of a song. The mirror in her mind breathed in. The sentence breathed out. The train chimed. The door seals loosened with a sigh like a house forgiving its inhabitants. In the reflection on the glass, the other Morgan watched with eyes that had made a religion of regret. A parcel rested at her feet, paper the color of old light. The letters on its side had learned the exact shape of Morgan's name. Morgan did not kneel. She picked up her bag, jar clinking softly, the folded bravery patient as a held breath, and stood into the ache of a city that might have been.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to be notified about upcoming releases to the Timetables of the Lost series, please subscribe. This has been a Bad Karma Drone production.